Hello children, welcome to today's class. In today's class, we will be learning about the 5th prose unit from the 10th standard first language English. The title of the lesson that we are going to do, it is what is moral action. Before we start the class, let us warm up our memories. Now try to recall this story, you just have to identify it. Could you recognize what is the moral of this story? Yes, you are right. Honesty is the best policy. So, you have heard this story under this particular moral. Now, our author in the lesson is questioning us. Is honesty really the best policy? Now, let us see what he has to say. Now, before that, what should we do? We have to find out who the author is. Now, listen to this poem which is going to describe our author and try to recognize whom I am talking about. Are you ready, children? Thin and frail, a divine soul in human frame, looked like a saint but was a king. Simplest was the life, unimaginable were the dreams. Won the war without weapons and with unthoughtful means. Awakened the slumbered souls, stormed the feeling, fought neither with cannon nor with guns, neither with sabre nor with swords, fought with peace but not with violence. Boycott the laws, disobey the deceitful acts, boycott the salt, bullet the mind, thundered the colonial rule, dismantled the empire. Such was the charge delivered by a saintly looking man. An emperor crowned with peace and non-violence, admired by the world, will be honored by generations, will be revisited by humanity before the illusion of materialism could end. To redefine the rules of existence in the centuries to come. Yes, could you identify it, children? It was Mahatma Gandhi. Now, this has been beautifully written by one Mr. Santosh Sharma. Now, this is his autobiography. His autobiography is My Experiments with Truth. Now, before we move to the next aspect or the lesson itself, in today's class we have to understand that it is very important for all of us to make notes and take notes. So, let us quickly see a very short video. Note making or note taking is an important study skill. It helps one to summarize. It also helps us to record information. Note making is very essential while we are reading something, whereas note taking is very essential when we are listening to some text. There are various methods of taking or making notes. Some of the useful ones are making linear notes. You can draw a flow chart. You can even draw a tree diagram or a spidergram, and there are many layouts like table. You can draw a diagram or you can even make lists. Now, children, you just saw the video, right? Now, let us try to identify various landmarks of Gandhiji's life. Now, here are a few landmarks of Gandhiji's life. So, this is just one simple example that I have given to you of note taking or note making. Okay, children, I am sure you will try to follow this in all other subjects. Now, let us look into the text. I want you to read the text with me, children. So, go to your textbooks on page 73. And remember, as we read it, please make notes. When can it be said that a particular action is moral? In asking this question, the intention is not to contrast moral with immoral actions, but to consider many of our everyday actions against which nothing can be said from the conventional standpoint and which some regard as moral. Most of our actions are probably non-moral. They do not necessarily involve morality. For the most part, we act according to the prevailing conventions. Such conventional behavior is often necessary. If no such rules are observed, anarchy will be the result, and the society or the social intercourse would come to an end. Still, the mere observance of custom and usage cannot properly be called morality. Now, let us try to understand what our author is trying to tell us here. He says every day we do some kind of a conventional action. Now, here you can see there is a person working in a hospital, and here you see a little boy, he is helping an old woman on the street cross the road. Let us see what our Gandhiji has to say on this. Are all conventional actions always moral? Necessarily moral? Yes, this is the question he is asking. Most of our actions are probably non-moral. So, he is saying it is neither moral nor immoral. Now, he says, but conventional actions are necessary. Now, why does he say it is necessary? He says if there are no conventional actions, there will be anarchy in the society. So, there will be chaos in the society. There will be so many problems that will come up in the society if there are some rules not laid. But are all of them moral? Again he questions. And without conventional or customary actions, definitely what would have happened to our societies? The human society would have come to an end. I suppose you understood this, children. Now, let us try to comprehend. What is it that we have to comprehend? In this paragraph, Gandhiji says that our conventional behavior is immoral, moral, neither moral nor immoral, necessary, unnecessary. You can give more than one answer here. Now, let us see what the answer is. Yes, he says it is neither moral nor immoral. So, he says it is actually non-moral. Does he have to say anything else about the conventional behavior? Yes, he says it is necessary for the society to be on track. Now, let us move to the second paragraph. A moral act must be our own act, must spring from our own will. If we act mechanically, there is no moral content in our act. Such action would be moral if we think it proper to act like a machine and do so. For in doing so, we use our discrimination. We should bear in mind the distinction between acting mechanically and acting intentionally. Now, what does Gandhiji say here? He says that simply doing some action will not become moral action. He says only if the moral act comes from our own will, then it is a moral act. He says anything which we do mechanically, even if it is a good act, it cannot be put under moral action. So, he says the distinction between acting mechanically and acting intentionally should be understood. So, whenever you are doing a good action, according to Gandhiji here, it means if the action is intentionally done, then only it is a moral action. Now, he continues to give us some examples. Now, let us read that quickly. It may be moral of a king to pardon a culprit, but the messenger bearing the order of pardon plays only a mechanical part in carrying the king's moral act. if the messenger were to carry the king's order, considering it to be his duty, then his action would be a moral one. How can a man understand morality who does not use his own intelligence and power of thought, but lets himself be swept along like a log of wood by a current? So, did you understand this? He is trying to compare a log of wood which is flowing on the water to a person who simply carries the order without using his intelligence. Sometimes a man defies convention and acts on his own with a view to doing absolute good. Such a great hero was Wendell Phillips. Children, here please know that Wendell Phillips was a social reformer who fought for the cause of the slaves in America. Now, he was addressing an assembly of people and he once said, "Till you learn to form your own opinions and express them, I do not care much what you think of me." So, he wanted the people to think and form their own opinion and express it, and only then probably he could do something for them. Thus, when we all care for what our conscience says, then alone can we be regarded to have stepped on the moral road. We shall not reach this stage as long as we do not believe and experience the belief that God within us, the God of all, is the ever-present witness to all our acts. It is beautifully said here, children, whatever we do, we must believe that there is someone always observing us. And what is that? It is finally our conscience. When can the messenger's act become a moral action? Yes, the messenger's act would become a moral one if he were to bear the king's order, considering it to be his duty. Right? Did you get it? Yes. Shall we proceed to the next paragraph, children? Yes. Now read it along with me. It is not enough that an act done by us is in itself good. That is to say, whether an act is moral or otherwise depends upon the intention of the doer. So, here he brings in the next aspect of calling an action moral. Two men may have done exactly the same thing, but the act of one may be moral and that of the other the contrary. Now, look at this. He is trying to give us an example here. He is trying to explain it further. First person who is feeding with pity, you call his action as moral because it is coming from his conscience. Whereas the second person is doing it, but what is his intention? His intention, though he is doing a good job, his intention is slightly selfish. Therefore, his act cannot be called moral. The reader here ought to remember the distinction between the two words non-moral and immoral. It may be that we do not always see good results flowing from a moral act. While thinking of morality, all that we need to see is that the act is good and is done with good intention. Please note this down, children. The act should be good and the intention behind it should also be good. The result of an action is not within our control. God alone is the giver of the fruit. Just like how we have all heard this beautiful line, Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. This was what Lord Krishna told Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Your only duty is to do the action and not to expect any fruit. So, Gandhiji is reciprocating the same idea here. Now, let us continue. Now, here he again explains about the intention. Historians have called Emperor Alexander great. Wherever he went in course of his conquest, he took the Greek language and the Greek culture, arts and manners, and today we are enjoying the benefits of Greek civilization. But the intention of Alexander behind all this was only conquest and renown. So, though he has brought us so much good, what was the intention? His intention was selfish. His only intention was to conquer the land and to become famous. Who can therefore say that his actions were moral? It was all right that he was termed great, but moral he cannot be called. So, this is Gandhiji's stand on Emperor Alexander. He agrees in calling him great, but he does not say that his actions are moral. Now, let us try to comprehend this paragraph. In the example of feeding the poor, whose action is moral action? Do you remember? Yes, let us check the answer. The person who feeds the poor out of pity is doing a moral act, unlike the one for whom it is a matter of prestige. Now, let us move to the next paragraph. These reflections prove that it is not enough for a moral act to have been done with a good intention, but it should have been done without compulsion. Now, see, he is bringing in another point here. He is bringing in another point here. There is no morality whatever in my act if I rise early out of the fear that if I am late for my office, I may lose my situation. So, you should not do anything under compulsion. That is what Gandhiji is trying to tell us here. Similarly, there is no morality in my living a simple and unpretentious life if I have not the means to live otherwise. What does it mean here? Suppose I am very poor and I choose to live a simple life, then it does not become a moral act. That is what he says. But plain, simple living would be moral if, though wealthy, I think of all the want and misery in the world about me and feel that I ought to live a plain, simple life and not a life of ease and luxury. So, he means to say that though I am very rich, if I choose to live a simple life, thinking of all the miseries that people are undergoing in the world around me, and then I make a decision to live a simple life, then that kind of a life is actually moral according to Gandhiji. Now, let us move further. Likewise, it is only selfish and not moral if the employer to sympathize with his employees or to pay the higher wages lest they leave him. Now, what does this mean? If the employer is scared, if he is compelled to give them more money because they are going to leave him if he does not give them, that is not moral. It would be moral if the employer wished well of them and treated them kindly, realizing how he owed his prosperity to them. This means that for an act to be a moral one, it has to be free from fear and compulsion. So, in this paragraph, he is stressing on a moral act being free from fear and compulsion. Now, let us try to comprehend this paragraph. When does simple living become moral? Simple living would be moral though one is wealthy. He thinks of all the wants and miseries in the world and feels that life ought to be lived in a very simple manner and not in an easy and luxurious way. Now, let us move to the next paragraph. So, what does Gandhiji say here? Now, does all action which is free from fear and compulsion, will it become moral action? He says no. When does it become a moral action? Only if there is no self-interest. So, he brings in the next criterion for an action to be called moral. Now, he gives here an example. What is it? That honesty cannot long endure what is practiced in the belief that is the best policy. See here, I told you in the beginning that Gandhiji does not always accept conventional acts. So, if you say honesty is the best policy, he says that need not be always the best policy. As Shakespeare says, love born out of the profit motive is no love, which means if behind the honest action, if there is some motive, if there is some self-interest, then again it will not remain a moral act. Now, when Gandhiji quotes Shakespeare, what argument does he want to strengthen? This is a question. Now, let us see what the answer is. Shakespeare says, love born out of profit motive is no love. So, through these words, Gandhiji wants to emphasize that actions prompted by self-interest are all worthless and not moral. Now, moving to the 6th paragraph, he says, anything which is having a material gain as a motive behind it, that cannot be moral here, it is non-moral here. Likewise, the same when we die or in the after death life also it is the same. So, he says that action is moral which is done only for the sake of doing good. He gives an example here. A great Christian, Saint Francis Xavier, passionately prayed that his mind might always remain pure. For him, devotion to God was not for enjoying a higher seat after death. Then why did he pray? He prayed because it was man's duty to pray. He does not expect any gain whether in this life or in the life after death. So, Gandhiji places him on a high pedestal. He also brings in another personality here whom we have to recall. He says, the great Saint Teresa wished to have a torch in her right hand and a vessel of water in her left, so that with these she might burn the glories of heaven, and with the other she could extinguish the fires of the hell, and men might learn to serve God from love alone. So, this was her intention, that man should serve God with love alone, without fear of hell and without temptation of heavenly bliss. To preserve morality thus demands a brave man prepared to face even death. Children, this line is so beautiful. To preserve morality thus demands a brave man. He says one should be very brave because of all the criteria that Gandhiji has told. It is not possible for men to live up to all those standards, but if a man has lived up to that standard, definitely he is a brave man and he is prepared to face even death. It is cowardice to be true to friends and to break faith with enemies. He says you should strike a balance between friends and enemies, which means you have to be true to both enemies as well as friends. Those who do good out of fear and haltingly have no moral right, or they have no moral virtue. So, this is what he says. He brings in examples of two people who were really great in one kind or the other, but let us see what happened to them. He speaks of Henry Clay. He was very kind, he was known for kindliness, but at some point in life, what did he do? He sacrificed his convictions for his ambition, he sacrificed his principles for his desires. Daniel Webster, for all his great intellect and his sense of the heroic and the sublime, once sold his intellectual integrity for a prize. By a single mean act, he wiped out all his good deeds. So, he sold his integrity, intellectual integrity for some prize. Now, though these were great men, they could not really be brave in Gandhiji's words, as he has spoken in the previous lines. This shows how difficult it is to judge the morality of a man's action, because we cannot penetrate the depths of his mind. At some point he will be very good, at some point he might become the opposite. So, it is very difficult for us to judge who is moral, who is immoral. We have also the answer to the questions which Gandhiji raised at the beginning, at the outset of this chapter. What is moral action? Incidentally, we also saw which kind of men could live up to that morality. He has drawn some milestones for us to identify what kinds of actions can be moral actions. Now, children, I want you to give a one-line summary of the paragraphs 2 to 6, which sums up what a moral act is according to Gandhiji. Now, if you pick the main ideas from each of these paragraphs, you will be able to give the one-line summary for each of these paragraphs. Now, shall I help you do it? Okay, come on, you can even note it down. An action becomes moral when it springs from one's will, it has good intention, it is free from fear and compulsion, it has no self-interest behind it. Moral action does not aspire for afterlife rewards. Now, quickly take down these assignments, children. You have these questions in your textbook, so you can mark it in your textbook. Match the acts with the type of action here. The first one, someone is feeding a street dog with water. The second incident, a policeman is helping the children to cross a road. In the third instance, yes, you can see that someone is being bribed. Now, which of these do you think is a moral action, immoral action and a non-moral action? Try to identify it. Now, quickly let us see how to write a paragraph.
A coherent paragraph consists of a topic sentence which gives you the main idea of the paragraph. Then, there are supporting sentences that strengthen the topic sentence and a concluding sentence which concludes the paragraph on a coherent note. Let's see an example for a topic sentence. Global advertising today is the biggest and most sophisticated thought control project ever undertaken. Now, we'll move to the supporting sentences. Some statistics reveal the true extent of this phenomenon. Global advertising expenditures, according to Benjamin Barber in his book Jihad vs. Macworld, 1995, rose sevenfold from 1950 to 1990, from a modest $39 billion to a whooping $256 billion. Barber adds that per capita global spending went up from $15 in 1950 to nearly $50 in 1996. One single company, the hamburger giant McDonald's, spends more than $1.4 billion each year on advertising. Let's now look at the concluding sentence. All these figures are huge indeed and getting bigger all the time. So, the parts of a paragraph can be, to recall once again, the topic sentence, the supporting sentences with colorful vocabulary, and a concluding sentence. So, a paragraph can easily be written using these three simple steps.
Children, till now you saw how to write a paragraph. Now, do this exercise. Arrange the jumbled sentences in a logical sequence and develop them into a coherent paragraph. This exercise is there on page 81 and 82 in your textbook. Now, please remember, keep the story in your mind. I want you to find out who is moral, whether both are moral, is one non-moral and the other moral. Yes, do this exercise, mental exercise, and try to recollect whatever has been taught in today's lesson. Thank you, children.